Well, what many of you, all of you, I'm sure have been waiting for, and look at that, Future Ready team. We are actually 5 minutes ahead of schedule. So I guess reading each other the riot act to make sure we didn't go on and on and on. Again, it's awesome to have you all here. If you are just signing on, please make sure that you say hello in the chat, who you are, where you're from. I have a couple more folks that signed up for some of the questions for the commissioner, Mark, John, and Michelle. If you check your email, if you are here, give me a shout and I'll make you a panelist there as well. But Commissioner Rosenworcel, it is an amazing honor to have you here today. We are so incredibly excited that you're joining us. As you know, you've got superintendents, you've got some school board members here, you've got lots of tech directors and CIOs who are going to spend the day problem solving together. They're going to spend the day as active participants in Zoom type meetings, problem solving some of the issues that they all have. But we know that you have been an amazing advocate for the work that you see, of the people that you see here. And so one of the ways, on behalf of Future Ready Schools and the Alliance for Excellent Education, we want to say thank you for your time this morning. We know that your time is very much in demand and the work that you do is absolutely vital for the children that we all serve on that ground level. So Commissioner, I actually have a little bit of a surprise for you. I'm actually going to turn it over to somebody that I know that you know through social media a little bit, and that's Superintendent Marlon Stiles. So Marlon, if you could actually kick off before we turn over to the Commissioner for a moment, that would be awesome.
Sounds great. Thank you to my good friend Tom Murray and the entire Future Ready team for putting today's event together. My name is Marlon Stiles. I'm a proud superintendent in Middletown City School District. Just a quick 90-second message. Dear Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel, back in May, the education community, we tagged you, out of all due respect, hashtag Relentless Rosenworcel. You have been an absolute rock star in your advocacy to connect kids now. And this morning, we just want to take a quick moment to share a short message with you. From the 8th grade honors student living without internet service in his grandma's house, from the rural communities without connectivity capability for their students, from the kindergarten future leader just learning how to read, and from the 11th grade future engineer taking pre-calculus, from the 6th grade student trying to access assignments in Schoology, from the brown and black students reaching out for systemic change, from the millions of students in our country who face the homework gap every single day, and from the parents who can't afford the bill from the internet providers, from every educator in this summit and across the country, and more importantly, from the student walking around in a community somewhere in this country that will be the next Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel, we say thank you. Keep doing what you're doing. We stand with you, and you can all say it with me, please. Hashtag Relentless Rosenworcel. Thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Stiles. We appreciate you and your leadership. For those of you that don't know, Marlon testified in front of Congress on behalf of you all about a month ago, just a relentless leader there in Middletown, Ohio for digital equity. And on behalf of Future Ready, part of our goal and our core mission is really supporting traditionally underserved and marginalized groups. So Commissioner Rosenworcel, I'd like to just ask you kind of a general question to kick off. For those of us at the district level that may not be as familiar with the work of the in-depth work of the FCC, or maybe they only know E-rate from that end, you could talk to us a little bit from just the intersection of technology and education and the role the FCC plays, just to kick us off. That'd be great.
Sure. Well, thank you, Tom. Thank you, Marlon, for your unreasonably kind words. Thank you all for what you do to prepare educators for the future and students for the future. I mean, it's right there in your, in your name, but talking about the present, my goodness, this pandemic has exposed a really hard truth, and it's that the digital divide is really, really big, and it hits too many of our students hard. And so to draw attention to that, a few years ago, I started talking about the homework gap, because I did so much with technology and bringing it to schools and bringing it to communities, but I felt that we didn't talk enough about students at home who don't have internet access and how that affects their ability to do nightly schoolwork. And I felt like that part of the digital divide needed a name. So we called it the homework gap. And my FCC colleagues have, tolerated my relentlessness on that. But as we sit here in this pandemic, it's never been more important for us to make it a national priority to solve it. And I do think that starts with the Federal Communications Commission. We are the nation's regulator for broadband communication services, and we are the national entity responsible for E-rate, which is the nation's largest education technology program. So when you think about those two things intersecting, the first thing that occurs to me is we need to use those powers, we need to use that authority to connect every child, no matter who they are or where they live. Because if we solve the homework gap, we're going to solve part of our nation's digital divide, and we're going to help make every student ready for a future that is definitely not analog.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. So we've got a bunch of questions for you. I'm actually going to stop the screen share here so we can see you full screen. I'm going to turn that off. And we're going to actually just take a moment, if we could. I'm going to turn it over to Bobby Ann Barnes, Assistant Superintendent in Pennsylvania, for the first question for you. So Bobby Ann.
Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you for joining us today. The pandemic has obviously caused so many issues for our nation over the past number of months. Broadly speaking, what is the FCC doing to help?
Okay, that's the big top level question. And the short answer, though I'll give you a longer one, is a lot, but definitely not enough. And what the FCC is doing primarily is it set up a commitment and a pledge called Keep America Connected. So it got more than 800 of the nation's communications providers to commit to not shut households off if they couldn't pay their bill, to waive overage fees, and also to open up some private Wi-Fi routers to expand unlicensed coverage for internet access. These things are good as far as they go, but frankly, they didn't go far enough because we know millions and millions of students are still not connected. Moreover, that pledge is coming to an end. And so what I see as I look over the horizon is a really complicated fall season for students and educators. And also I see a national imperative, which is to use the summer months to make sure when school starts again, we have a theory or a way or a fund to make sure every student is connected. Now, the agency has done a lot of small things that are important. We've relaxed gift rules and E-rate programs. We've changed deadlines. We've made it easier to get service to rural hospitals. We've also given out some special temporary authorities for spectrum access. But the reality is, until we get every child connected in this country, I don't think we've done enough.
All right, great. So one of the things, our next question here, if we could, and Carl, I'm not sure if you just saw my quick note. Mark Finstrom, Mark, are you here? I'm not sure if you signed on. Mark had a question that he wanted to ask. I'll read his question on his behalf because I don't see him there. Unless, Mark, you're going to pop that in the chat real quick. So, Commissioner, Mark's question was, as a champion for internet equity, you have stood with districts like Highline Public Schools, where they are in Washington, and together they've tried to get Chairman Pai to understand that internet access is not as ubiquitous as he believes. And sorry, I'm reading this across an Excel document. And what can we do from the awareness of his misunderstanding? And do you believe Chairman Pai will concede to funding hotspots or LTE environments through school E-rate 470s? So thoughts on that from Mark Finstrom in Washington.
That's a great question. By my nature, I'm an impatient optimist. So I think this is possible, but I don't think it happens without us making a lot of noise. I do know this. I've been really yelling from the rooftops in Washington that we can use the existing E-rate program to make sure every school that relies on E-rate has Wi-Fi hotspots or routers to loan out, something to get more kids connected. I don't see anything in the law that prohibits us from doing that right now. And in fact, the FCC ran a pilot project on that in 2011 and 2012, so I know it's possible. Last week, I testified in front of the Senate Commerce Committee with my peers, and here's what struck me. This issue came up again and again, but I also saw senators who had not engaged extensively on this issue start to raise it and raise it again and raise it again, that we should be able to use the E-rate program to do this by the fall. Moreover, there's legislation in the Senate right now, as well as in the House, that have huge numbers of co-sponsors in the Emergency Educational Connections Act that would actually demand that the FCC use the E-rate program to help with things like loaning out Wi-Fi hotspots. So I would like it if the FCC did it on its own, but I will take congressional pressure to make it happen. And I think there will be another coronavirus stimulus bill this summer before Congress goes out. And it is my deep hope that this kind of legislation passes, makes it in there. But I also think you should keep up the noise level because that's how you make it happen.
Thank you for that answer. And if I can kind of hop in and kind of follow up with that one, what specific actions can districts take to improve digital equity for all students?
Oh, that's a big one. And I do want to acknowledge, as someone who's a specialist in technology, I don't want to tell you that I've got all the answers for equity for educators. Those are complex issues. But I do know that this pandemic has made clear that every school has to do some kind of survey of its students and its parents to understand what connectivity is available at home. I don't think you manage problems you don't measure. And doing that kind of measurement is an essential part of figuring out your solution. And so the schools that have figured out how to do some kind of survey and get that information are able to size their problem and develop solutions. And I hate to put another burden on our nation's schools, but because boy, have they been heroes in this crisis. But I do think figuring out who has connection at home and who doesn't is really how you get started. And it's something that every school should try doing in whatever way possible.
Well, everyone that knows me knows I love that answer, right? So I can't agree
And we
more.
didn't coordinate, right?
That was perfect, just perfect. You have to evaluate before you understand the scope of the issue. I have a question here from Michelle Green. Michelle, are you here? No? Okay. So I'm going to ask this question on her behalf. She's from Eagle Point Schools in Oregon. And her question is, as many are asking, she hopes, what will it take to include hotspots, hardware, and data coverage as covered items to relieve districts from the expense of providing internet access at home?
So let me unpack a little further what I said before. I think E-rate, which provides support to our nation's schools for internet access, can be used as a legal tool and as a fund to help those same schools provide things like Wi-Fi hotspots for loan to their students. I don't think the law prohibits it. The law speaks of classrooms. Those classrooms are clearly online. In addition, it provides the opportunity to support additional services. So we got to figure out how to modernize E-rate to meet this moment. And I'm going to keep on pressing my colleagues to do that. But I'm also going to keep on hoping that Congress pushes them if my own pressure is not enough. I think the law is adequate for this moment. You just got to be a little ambitious about how you use it. But I'm also cautiously optimistic that we will see some legislation from Congress to help resolve this problem in the next few weeks.
Great. Commissioner, we're going to go over to Lisa Gustinelli from St. Vincent Ferrer School in Florida. Lisa, what's your question?
I'm just unmuting. I'm sorry. Hello. Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you. These children that you see in the picture behind me are in a rural area, Indiantown in Florida. They're children of migrant workers at Hope Rural School. My school does work with them, and more than half of them did not learn during COVID because they had no internet in the home. They had to go to the school and just pick up paper packets, Ziploc bags, and bring them home. The school offered Wi-Fi in the parking lot, but these are migrant children. I mean, the families didn't even understand how to connect to it, and they didn't have devices. I'm leading a project with Arizona State University, Shaking EDU. We're trying to have a call to action. So what can I do, and what can I encourage others to do? Number one, to get these children connected, because they're also in a COVID hotspot. So it seems like it was not going to open for them with the rest of the county. And then what can I act, something very concrete other than just write a letter? Can I get them connected for this upcoming in the next month or so? And how can I encourage others throughout the nation to do things to get their rural students connected?
That's such a good question. And this is one of the harder answers. So let's imagine some areas of the country, because they definitely exist, where students live in communities that simply don't have broadband service. And it's not just that there isn't a wire in the ground, it's that if you hold your phone up, there are no bars.
Right.
So the hard question is, what do we do to help those communities? In the long term, we've absolutely got to figure out how to get this infrastructure everywhere. To me, this is the water, gas, electricity of this century. We've got to figure out how it reaches everyone everywhere. That's a matter of not just educational equity, but equity for all of our communities, so they have a fair shot at 21st century success. And there is some effort underway to fund more broadband projects in rural communities, but I will be honest with you, infrastructure takes a while. So between now and the start of the school, what can you do? Some of the solutions that I've seen, in addition to the kind of school and libraries making available their Wi-Fi to the community in the parking lot, is that in South Carolina, we've seen school buses outfitted with Wi-Fi that don't just take students anymore, but they actually go and park in the communities that are least likely to be connected. So those kids get some connectivity while they're at home. I also saw that solution in rural California and outside of Palm Springs, where there are also a lot of migrant workers who live in small trailer homes with their kids. And the superintendent went and parked those buses adjacent to them in order to provide service. I think that is probably, unfortunately, the best near-term opportunity we have. But I think in the long term, we got to figure out how to get this service to everyone, everywhere, to solve the kind of problem you're describing.
And that's definitely something we've seen in our community here in Austin too, as well, Commissioner. I know that they've put school buses out there to help. And I think when you were mentioning earlier about, having the ability to get those surveys out to parents, of course, a lot of that is happening digitally. So there is a challenge there too, in terms of that gap. So I do appreciate you thinking about how that happens. I'm going to kick it over to Christy Novak, who's from Pacifica School District in California. Christy, do you have your question ready?
I do. Good morning, Commissioner.
morning.
So obviously, in light of just your mention about long-term needs for infrastructure, in order for us to all have free internet, my question pertains to low access. How can obstacles for families to obtain low-cost internet be truly accessible for social equity? Many times there are multiple hurdles that can be confusing or challenging, including proof of residency or income questions that can be intimidating or not in a language that they may need. As a small district, right, I try and reach out and say, I'm happy to help you, but it is very difficult because we are at capacity, and even just to get families there. And in addition, if they don't have devices, everything's online. So I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts about that.
This is a really good question. There are a lot of efforts to update an FCC program called Lifeline. And Lifeline helps low-income households get modern communications. It's actually been around since President Reagan was in the White House, and it's been updated over time. And just yesterday, Senator Wyden and some of his peers introduced a bill to really update it further for broadband. And, I think that's terrific, and I want to definitely indicate that I support it. But I think there's something unique about schools and the relationship that students and parents have to the school. And it's why I think the simplest and easiest way to get those students connected is to move through the school and the E-rate program. It takes away the parent signing up, the concern about recurring income, the possibility, hard questions about residency and status, and they all disappear. And I think that's the tremendous power of schools and the communities being a force for loaning out things like Wi-Fi hotspots and getting students connected. Because there's already a connection by virtue of having that student in school, and there's already trust from the family. And I think it reduces the friction to get households connected, which is why I want to see the E-rate program used to facilitate it.
Great, thank you.
And so our next question is going to come from Rachel Gordon. So can you tell us a little bit more about how we're going to be doing some of these things with E-rate?
So, yeah, Adam, Rachel's on, I believe. So Rachel, you are good to go if we want to kick over to you,
There
Rachel.
she is.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Good morning. My question is, the goal and need to ensure all students have broadband internet access at home has really fallen on individual school districts this spring. My question is kind of going into that utilities idea a little bit more, is what work is being done or what new opportunities are there to approach internet access as a critical service in the same way as electricity or natural gas?
Yeah, it's really the right question for this moment. Look, we were sent home as a nation, told to go to work, go to school online, get our healthcare online, get any kind of services we needed online. And, I think for a long time, Washington and Congress thought broadband was a luxury good, right? That internet access was really nice to have, but it wasn't need to have. And I think this pandemic has thrust us into the future, because I don't think there's a question in anyone's mind right now that every household needs it to have a fair shot at success. And for all the awful things that we'll remember from these days, what I will remember is sort of the validation of the idea that this is an essential service We need to find a way to make sure everyone has access. You know, it was just a century ago that we had the Rural Electrification Act, right? As a nation, we used to treat it as a given that there were rural communities and low-income communities where you didn't have electricity and you couldn't turn the light on, and we just said it wasn't economical to serve them, and they would be in the dark. But we did something audacious in the Rural Electrification Act. We mapped where service was and was not. We figured out how to extend it there commercially if it was viable, and then we set up cooperatives to serve in the areas where it wasn't. I just feel like we need to take a page from that history and act in the same way, because just like you said, it is just as necessary today as water, gas, electricity. These things are in our households. You just don't have a fair shot at success if you, your household, and your community doesn't have access. So I think we have to reshape our thinking in Washington and have oversight, and then recognize that closing the digital divide is not some kind of luxury far down on the list. It's a national priority because everything else will flow from that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that answer. Our next question comes from Bonnie Nobling, and she's actually on. Bonnie, what's your question?
Good morning, Commissioner. I feel like you may have touched close to the answer to this, but let me reword my question anyway. What I've asked is, what plans are in place with broadband and or cell providers to provide free internet access to any family that can demonstrate need? We actually are fairly fortunate in our area. I'm in the southern tier of New York State, where we have pretty good cell connectivity in our area. And, you know, we did survey families, and maybe because of pride, many families said, yeah, we have the internet, but then we've learned that their connectivity is really mom or dad's smartphone that they're paying on a month by month, and maybe that month by month had to get discontinued during the closure. And I feel like that should be a non-issue.
Yeah. You know, about a month and a half ago, I did an event with Congressman Peter Welch from Vermont, and I'm from New England, so this sort of felt familiar. And I got the chance to speak to a middle school teacher who was from one of those towns really far north near the Canadian border. You know, the kind of place that's always lush and green, and so imagine the cows in the background, just out of a postcard. But service is scarce, and they too had tried to survey their school, and then over the course of 1 week, she ran into the mother of one of her students, and that student hadn't been in class lately. And the mother knew, like all moms do, right? She exchanged some pleasantries with the teacher from social distance, and then immediately let her know she's not in class because the internet ran out. And I can't get that out of my head, because what she was saying is she had conveyed to her school that they had access. It was strictly through a smartphone, but it was data capped. And there was no way they could distribute that data capped internet access out over her work, her husband's work, and the schoolwork of all of their children. So I think we do have to have a broader conversation about what access is table stakes, because I think that incident that I just described is happening all over the country. And it does make it challenging for you to survey your students and your teachers to really get the answers you need. But here's what I also know. There are a lot of broadband providers nationwide who have made low cost and even free services, and some without data caps, available to students and low income households. That's terrific, but there are of course two major problems. The way that those providers offer services, they're not in every community. And then second, I think one of the more challenging facts is it's not always easy to sign up for that stuff. It's not always widely advertised. And as a result, it's really an imperfect solution. And we need to figure out a program that's not just about the generosity of our providers, which we should applaud, but is about the justice of getting it to everyone, everywhere. And that's why I think we need to use E-rate to make that happen.
Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Commissioner. So we have one more question, and then possibly one or two just from our panelists here as well. I want to go over to Janice from Community Consolidated School District 15 in Illinois. So Janice, take it away.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Commissioner. My question is, are there any plans in the works or even discussions taking place around providing universal broadband service as an educational right?
You know, I think that what is emerging from this crisis is you don't have a fair shot if you don't have it. I mean, I always tell people when I was growing up, like if I needed to do my homework, it was paper, a pencil, and my brother leaving me alone. but those days are gone. Even before this crisis, you needed internet access. Teachers assign homework that requires internet access. Essential research is done with internet access. And I think we have to start thinking about it like paper and pencil. It is a necessary tool for education. There's so much that's bad about this crisis and this pandemic, but I think it's forced the realization you just described on a lot of people in a lot of places that hadn't recognized how essential it is for education. I think E-rate was ahead of its time in bringing that connectivity to schools, but now we got to figure out how to solve the homework gap and get it to everyone's home as well.
And thank you for that answer. There's a lot of great questions coming up in the chat too. And kind of to reiterate some of the things you've been mentioning, Commissioner, I noticed that Andy Mann says in here that in Finland since 2010, it was the only country where internet access was considered a legal right, not a privilege. And I love that idea. And that's kind of like where along lines of where you're trying to push us towards, which I think is great. In terms of the FCC and the Department of Ed, I'm curious, is there a collaboration that's happening there? Because I know that we have a lot of educators kind of helping on the FCC side, but also the Department of Ed. How does that look? Can you pull back the curtain a little bit and give us a little bit of what that looks like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I will be honest, as the senior minority commissioner at the agency, I'm not in those dialogues, but I'm sitting next to them. So I'll tell you what they look like from where I am. I know that in the CARES Act, there was roughly $13 billion in aid that was sent out to schools, plus an additional $3 billion that can be allocated among the states. And the chairman of the FCC, Ajit Pai, put out a statement with Secretary DeVos about how they were going to encourage the use of those funds for technology purposes and connectivity. By the way, I think that's great as far as it goes, but here's what I know about the CARES Act educational funding. You know, there's a laundry list of things that goes to. How to reopen schools, what resources you need, teacher training, sanitizing schools. In other words, those funds can be applied to so many things. It's not a dedicated pool for connectivity for students. And I think that's the power of what E-rate provides. We build on the existing program, one every state knows how to use, and get connectivity for students. And we are not going to compete with sanitizing schools and public spaces. So I like what's been set up, but I don't honestly think it's adequate. And I appreciate that there's been some coordination between the FCC and the Department of Education. But again, I don't think it truly meets this moment and the connectivity that our students are going to require.
Thank you for that very honest answer, Commissioner.
So, Commissioner, one other question for you. You've got a whole bunch of educators, superintendents, tech directors, and others here today. What's one piece of advice that you have or encouragement that you have for all of them? And if there's anything we didn't ask you that you'd like to share with this great, incredible group of educators, feel free to do so as well. So give us some advice and any other tidbits that you have that you'd like to share. And otherwise, we're going to wrap up because we know your time is very valuable. So go ahead.
I really believe you don't get anything done in Washington without making a ruckus. And I think that educators from across the country have a collective power right now that is extraordinary. People recognize more than 50 million students were sent home told to go to school from their dining room tables and their living rooms. They recognize that school in the fall could be very different than what it's been in the past. And I would just encourage everyone from across the country to write members of Congress, to write the FCC, and tell us how important it is to solve the homework gap and use E-rate to do it. You might not think that your voice individually is powerful, but when a voice from a small town in rural America says exactly the same thing as an educator from a big city, what starts to happen is we realize this challenge unites us. And it's something that we have the power to solve. So I would just encourage you to use the summer months to continue to make some noise, make a ruckus, because I think solving the homework gap or putting a significant dent in it is within reach. And there's nothing I'd like to see better than us be better prepared for the fall.
Awesome. Well, Commissioner, we can't thank you enough for giving of your time today for these educators. Panelists that you can see, let's give a virtual round of applause. If you are at home as well, we know that you have been an incredible advocate for the work that they are all doing on the ground. And we can't thank you enough for being relentless, as Superintendent Stiles shared earlier. Your voice, your wisdom, your encouragement for educators, and your unparalleled work for the kids that we all serve is absolutely amazing. So we thank you for your time today. Continue to be that advocate, and we stand alongside you. So if you're watching the chat at all, the chat's flying by with so many thank yous for you and for your work, and we hope that you and your family also stay safe and healthy. So thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
And you're all such dynamos. I'm so glad that you do what you do. The future is going to be brighter for having your advocacy and your voice in it. I'm so enthused that there's a community thinking about how to make technology more broadly and equitably available to our nation's students. So thank you for what you do.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner. We appreciate it. Thanks for being here.